Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the third of the library's Quick Bites presentations, and this one is called Ensure Your Audience Finds Your Paper. My name is Tom Goodfellow. I'm one of the academic liaison librarians here at the University of Sydney, and I have a colleague here who will introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Simon Ho. I'm a professor of molecular evolution in the School of Life and Environmental Sciences.
So what we're going to be talking about today is how to make your work more findable and thereby increase your citation rates through smart use of using a good title, using a good abstract, and writing in such a way to make your work clear and accessible. All of these things have been demonstrated to increase your citation rates and therefore your impact. If you don't use smart titles and abstract, no one will find your work, and invisible research is by definition low impact. Now, you all spend a lot of time doing research, you all spend a lot of time writing, and if you make a mistake on something as simple and easy as getting a bad title or abstract, it's a real waste of all that effort. So, we're going to start not with how you write, but about how people search. I'm a librarian, so I concern myself a lot with how people search and how you connect the work to what people are looking for. And a word that librarians use a lot, may not actually be a word, but it's one we use, is findability. You need to increase the findability of your work by being smart with your title, abstract, keywords, and writing. The perfect search will find your research no matter what. If someone's looking for work in your area and you sit down, ideally with a librarian, as I would like you to do, and construct a very complex and thoughtful search strategy, implement it perfectly across a range of databases, doesn't really matter what you've done, those people will find your work, and that's great for them. However, I think it's fair to say that most of us, when we do search for literature, don't sit down and begin with a structured, thoughtful search. We normally go to the dreaded G word. We normally go to Google Scholar. We type in a string of words, and we hope that what we want comes up to the top. So that has two implications in terms of your title and abstract. When you search a database or Google Scholar, the things that come, first of all, the things you find are determined by word matching what's in your title and abstract with what's been input into Google. And the other thing that happens in Google Scholar specifically is that those things get ranked. And the search terms that have the closest correlation to your title, abstract, and keywords will be pushed to the top of the Google Scholar list. Whoever looked at page 2 of a Google search? Nobody. So what you need to do is make sure that your title, abstract, and keywords match what the casual or inexperienced researcher is going to be searching for when they go on to Google Scholar. Okay. What makes a good title? We're going to start off with some generalities, and then we're going to move on to some specific examples. The first thing that makes a good title is that it's short. The literature demonstrates specifically, and I don't know quite how they came up with this number, but it has been demonstrated that a title with 16 or fewer words will have more downloads, and, importantly, more citations. So the shorter the title, as a general rule, the better. Obviously, you need to balance concision with making your meaning clear, but if you can keep it short, do so. You can use a phrase rather than a complete sentence. Any extra little words, adverbs, or whatever, prepositions, they're kind of wasted. You want to stick with the keywords that other people are going to be searching for. You want to be straightforward and honest. You don't want to oversell what your work is saying. You don't want to say, this is the first time this has ever been done. This is the most complete study of this subject. You want to be straightforward, so that people aren't annoyed once they actually read the paper. And you want to use smart title words. What I mean by smart title words is words that people are likely to look for. If you are in a field where multiple words might be used for the same issue, for the same subject area, and there are different terms used for that same thing, have a careful look at what literature you've been reading, what the leading researchers in that area use, and share the terminology with them, because that's what people are going to be looking for. You don't want to use your own terminology, even if it's more accurate or you prefer it. If people aren't searching for that work and you use that terminology, they won't find your work. So that's the general idea of what makes a good title. Now I'm going to pass over to Simon, and he's going to talk about some specific examples about what a good title consists of.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a few examples from papers that have been published quite recently. And so one of the approaches to formulating a title for a paper, and this is something that's typically quite a difficult task, where when I publish papers, it often involves quite a lot of back and forth with my co-authors to decide on what message we want to convey in the title, what angle we want to take, and how to express a complex result or a complex idea, describe a complex system. But one approach a commonly used approach to writing a title for a paper is to use something that's catchy or makes reference to popular culture, or in this example here, current American politics. And you'll see actually quite a few examples in this particular format. And so these are just a few examples. And actually, one of the risks of using titles of this type is that they can very quickly become cliched. And if you do a Google Scholar search for titles of this type, you'll actually find dozens or even hundreds of titles of this form published in the last couple of years. And there are some other risks associated with this sort of title. First, these titles aren't necessarily telling you much about what the content of the paper is. They do have some of the keywords that you want readers to find in a search, but they don't really tell you what the paper's found, or maybe even what the main argument of the paper is. Another risk is that these often are not as funny or as appealing as you might think they are to other people, and they'll often fall into the category of it seemed like a good idea at the time. And another risk is that, especially when we're referring to current events, these might not make so much sense in the future after current American politicians have been forgotten, or when readers are coming from other cultural or linguistic backgrounds, they might not understand the reference you're trying to make in your title. So if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who is not familiar with current American politics, these titles would actually sound pretty odd. But I'm kind of guilty of using this approach myself. This is the title of a paper that I published in 2006 when I was a PhD student, and some of you will recognize the reference to Bob Dylan here. And actually, Bob Dylan lyrics and song titles are quite widely used in the scientific literature. And a study from 2015 found more than 200 papers using Bob Dylan references in the title. And in the case of my paper, the reference was actually relevant to the content of the paper. But if you read this title, it might not really make much immediate sense. So it's not particularly descriptive about what the content of the paper is. That study also found more than 600 titles using references to the Beatles. So the Beatles were even more popular. But interestingly, the study found that the papers that used Bob Dylan references in their titles actually had fewer citations than other similar papers. So I guess we should now move on to titles that we would consider to be the most effective. And this is an example of a paper title that is well constructed and I would consider to be a very effective title. It's from a science paper published a few years ago. I wasn't involved in this study. And this paper was a very large-scale study that involved dozens of scientists from an international team, and they analysed genome data to look at insect evolution. So in this title, the title actually states the outcome of the approach used in the study and the outcome achieved in the study. So phylogenomics, the first term there, that indicates to the reader that they analysed genome data to look at the evolutionary patterns in the genomes, and they state what they achieved in the study. They resolved the time scale of the evolution of insects and also the relationships among insect groups, so the pattern of insect evolution. So the most effective titles tend to be those that actually state positively state the outcome of the study. So they state the main finding of the study. And studies have shown that papers with titles that state the outcome of the study tend to be more highly cited. Most titles actually don't take this approach. I think about 70% of titles are merely descriptive. So in this particular example, a descriptive title would be something like a phylogenetic analysis of insect evolution. Okay, so a phylogenetic analysis of insect evolution tells you what the authors did in the study, so what the study was about, but it doesn't tell you what the study achieved, what the main finding from the study was.
Okay, before we move on to abstracts, I must apologise. I forgot to mention at the start that we are attempting to leave a bit of time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, please type them in as the email you received suggests, and we'll attempt to answer any questions at the end. So moving on to abstracts. If the title of a paper is analogous to the title of a book, an abstract is analogous to the blurb on the back of the book. So the title grabs your attention, and the abstract kind of seals the deal on whether you're going to read that paper or not. What makes a good abstract? Now, as I mentioned before, most searches will search both the title and the abstract and compare those to the keywords that are being searched for. And therefore, you might be able, in the abstract, to use synonyms, alternative terms to the ones you've used in the title, using the most relevant and popular terms in the title. But in an abstract, you might be able to use other terms that will also be picked up by a search engine. You can repeat important keywords if possible. The abstract should be clear, accurate, and convey the content. It should consider the non-English speaking background audience, so avoid the use of idiom or any culturally specific terminology or phraseology. And what we're going to talk about a little bit more with Simon's example is this background, aim, approach, results, conclusion kind of structure, where you create a narrative in your abstract, so someone who's coming fresh to your paper can read the abstract, and because we're all hardwired to look for stories, it kind of tells the story of what the paper contains, what they investigated, and what the results were. So over to Simon.
Okay, so I'm going to use an example from the paper that I mentioned earlier about, so this is the science paper from, I think it was 2014, and the study Phylogenomics resolves the timing and pattern of insect evolution. So this is an example of what I consider to be a very well-constructed abstract. And an abstract contains certain elements. It's a very important part of the paper because it's one of the most widely read parts of the paper. But actually, constructing an abstract is fairly formulaic. So if we can look at this abstract and actually dissect the components. And this is an abstract that's very well suited to a high-impact journal like Science. So the abstract should begin with a statement of the background or a kind of brief introduction. And in this case, the introduction is extremely brief. It's only part of a sentence. And it just tells you about insects being the most species-rich group of animals. Normally, the background or the introductory text would be about 1 or 2 sentences, but in this case, it's very short. And so the next element is one of the most important. It's the statement of the knowledge gap. So here, after the introduction is given, the background information is given, the abstract states that the relationships among many of the major groups of insects remain unresolved. And so this statement of the knowledge gap provides the motivation for the study. It explains why the study is needed and why it's important. The next part of the abstract states the goal of the study, so the aims of the study. In this case, the authors analysed genome data to estimate the evolutionary relationships of insects. And they also, it kind of states what their study achieved. They estimated the phylogeny or the evolutionary tree of insects. So then after these 3 elements comes the main body of the abstract, and that's where there's more detail provided about the data set, the methods that they used, and also some of the key findings. And then the abstract finishes with a statement of the broader implications of what are the broader implications of the results? So they tie it back to the importance of the outcomes of the analyses. So you can see from this example that there are certain elements that should be there in an abstract, and this is a suitable formula for constructing an abstract for a high-impact study where you provide a brief introduction and you state the knowledge gap. So you make it clear early on in the abstract why the study is important, why it's timely.
Before we move on to good writing, one thing we haven't mentioned so far is the importance of author keywords. When you submit a paper to a journal, most of the time you'll be asked to supply some author keywords with the paper, which will add to the metadata, which again affects the findability of your paper. Now, author keywords, sometimes you have a numbers limit and sometimes you don't, but in this case, it's not part of the paper, it's just part of the metadata, the data that surrounds the paper and is read by databases and Google Scholar. And it's your chance to really expand on those keywords, use some unusual terminology, something that someone might use if they're very inexperienced in the field, but for whom your paper might still be of interest. So do consider those author keywords. A lot of researchers that I speak to don't spend a lot of time thinking about them, but you never know, it might increase your citation rate for fairly low effort. Is there anything you'd like to say about author keywords?
No, I think you've covered it there.
Okay. We're now going to move on to good writing, so this is the third step. So you've caught them with the title, you've sold it with the abstract, and now Simon's going to talk about the importance of good writing and how that will affect the impact that your work has.
Okay, so once you've caught the attention of the reader through the title and abstract, the important thing now is to maintain that interest. And the golden rule of writing is to write for your intended audience, not for yourself or your immediate peers. So you need to consider the reader and put yourself into the reader's shoes. So your goal should be, so at the heart of your paper will be your data or your key findings. And what you want to do is you want to convey those as clearly and concisely as possible to the reader. And if you're aiming for high impact outlet, you're likely to be writing for a multidisciplinary journal or a general journal in your field. So it might be Science on Nature or PNAS, or in biology specifically, it might be Current Biology or PLOS Biology as examples. And the readers of these journals are likely to come from a very broad range of backgrounds in terms of their expertise, but also in terms of whether English is their first or second or even third language. So it's important to write clearly and to have a well-structured article that makes it as easy as possible for your readers to identify the motivation for your study and the key findings. So because the readers will have a pretty wide range of background knowledge and expertise, you need to bear in mind that any technical concepts and terms need to be fully explained and defined. So you want to be able to provide all information there for the reader to be able to understand the importance of your work. And this might include familiarity with technical terms, so all technical terms should be defined. And I generally encourage minimizing abbreviations as well, because they can make the text quite difficult to read. So the clarity of the article is not just limited to the textual content, but also to the figures. So it's important to choose figures that clearly convey your key findings and that are easy to interpret for your readers. And one of the factors that's often overlooked is color blindness. So when you're choosing colors for your figures, bear in mind that some of the readers will be colorblind, and you can check whether there are websites where you can check whether the colors will be distinguishable to people with various forms of color blindness. The most common form of color blindness makes it difficult to distinguish between red and green. And what you can do is you can convert your figures to grayscale to see if the shades are still distinguishable.
One other resource that's useful for graphs and so on, I'm actually the subject librarian for psychology, and there's a resource called APA Style Central that's available on the university website, and that's something that has some quite good information on how to construct graphs and tables and so forth in a useful way. So we've reached the end of the main body. There are a few things I wanted to say before we get on to your questions. One, Simon has touched on the importance of where you publish in order to increase the impact of your work. And if that is something that you're really keen on, I would suggest that you come to next week's Quick Bite, which is on strategic publishing, and indeed sign up for any other Quick Bites. I imagine many of you have signed up for more than one, but if you have a particular interest in working out where best to publish, next week's Quick Bite will be of particular use. And on the point about the range of people that are going to be searching for your work, which is something else Simon mentioned, we've been talking mainly about increasing citation rates, which is, of course, the kind of the blunt object with which we evaluate the impact of your research and of any given paper. But bear in mind that the university also places great value on community impact, and a lot of people, maybe they're politicians or parliamentary researchers or journalists or bloggers or just interested members of the public, they're not going to be using the same sophisticated terminology that your academic peers might be using, and that's why things like author keywords and using different terminology in your abstract where possible can come in useful, because you might capture people who aren't familiar with the real nuts and bolts jargon of your field, but do know the general terms and do have a genuine interest in your work. Okay, so we have had one question. We've had a couple of questions, in fact. So the first one is from Larissa, and she asked us to expand a little bit on the use of author keywords, and in particular how that correlates with mesh headings. So I think this is a bit of a librarian-ish question, so I'll take this one if that's okay. Yes, in a field like complementary medicine, first of all, work out which database that the paper you publish in is, the journal you publish in, which databases that would be in. Because if you're in a paper, if you're in a journal that does have mesh headings applied, like Medline or PsycInfo or similar, those will be attached by the staff at that database, at that organisation. But it does make sense where possible to use mesh headings as your author keywords, because if someone has searched, first of all, in, say, Medline, and they've been pushed towards using certain keywords, then they are likely to replicate those keywords when they go on and try other databases and Google Scholar and whatever else. So if you can correlate with those, that's fine. If not, it's not a big problem, because a lot of searches, most searches for in other databases other than Medline will not be searching for those mesh headings. So if you can identify mesh headings, great. If not, just a keyword or a number of keywords, as I suggest, that cover various ways of phrasing is useful too. Bear in mind that terminology changes over time and changes over geography as well. So if you're dealing with client groups with certain conditions, the terminology for those conditions may differ in different areas. For example, ALS versus motor neurone disease, depending on whether you're US or UK based or whatever. So keywords are an opportunity to pick up on different terminology that's used throughout different geographical areas. And we've got a second question as well, I think. Which websites can be used to test colour blindness? Do you know?
If you do a search for a colour blindness simulator, there's actually quite a lot of different options. I had a look last night, and pretty much the whole first search page just gives you links to a whole range of colour blindness simulators. So you can play around with those, and some of them will actually help you choose colours that will be distinguishable to people with different forms of colour blindness.
Mm. A lot of journals will have their own requirements or specifications about which colours and which formats you use as well.
Mm.
So that's the first thing you need to worry about. But there's also, in terms of accessibility, I know from writing for the web that there's an awful lot of stuff out there about colour blindness.
I mean, the safest option is often just to make sure that all the shades are distinguishable in grayscale, and that will often be the case because there's usually a fee associated with publishing colour figures. So a lot of people do prefer to have those grayscale figures in the print version, at least, if not in the online version of their article.
Okay, and I haven't got your name, the person who asked the question, but I see my colleague Sarah, who's in the room with us, has just attached a link there to a colour blindness simulator, so you can jump on and so someone else. Okay, so are there any more questions? Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. We'll just leave you with our contact details. Both myself and Simon are happy for you to contact us about any of the things that we've talked about. And we hope that this has been useful for you. Thanks very much for attending.